Veth's fingers moved across the data tablet with practiced precision, logging atmospheric readings that had not changed in 6 rotations. The observation deck stood empty, except for him, a vast curve of transparent alloy overlooking the planet that hung below like an impossible promise. The Sci-Fi generation ship maintained its orbit in silence, all systems functioning within acceptable parameters, all resources accounted for, all protocols observed. He had been born to this order. 32 rotations of disciplined adherence to the Council of Preservation's directives. He spoke 11 languages, including 3 dead tongues preserved only in the ship's archives. He had never missed a duty cycle. He had never questioned an assignment. The planet turned beneath the observation deck, blue and green and utterly forbidden. Oxygen levels indicated breathability. Water existed in liquid form. Temperature variance fell within ranges that biological texts suggested could sustain complex life. For the Sci-Fi, it was a death sentence wrapped in beauty. Veth's own reflection ghosted across the viewport, tall and silver-skinned, marked with the geometric scars of resource-sharing ceremonies across his shoulders and forearms. The scars were ritual, symbolic cuts made during adolescence to demonstrate understanding that survival required sacrifice. He had made his cuts without hesitation, had felt pride in the clean precision of the blade, in his ability to endure without complaint. The ship's fusion cores were failing. Recycling systems operated at 63% efficiency and declining. Population controls had been tightened twice in the last 5 rotations. Everyone knew the mathematics. 2 decades, perhaps less, before the final generation suffocated in darkness. The planet below offered nothing they could use. Their bodies, refined over millennia of void dwelling, would collapse under the gravitational pull. Bone structure insufficient, cardiovascular systems inadequate, skin too sensitive to unfiltered radiation. Veth returned to his quarters and ate his measured ration in silence. The food was nutritionally complete and tasted of nothing. He logged the consumption in his personal record. He prepared his sleeping platform. He reviewed tomorrow's assignments. The routine was certainty. The routine was survival. Then the council summoned him at off-cycle hours and everything fractured. The hibernation chamber sat in the cargo bay like an accusation. Survey drones had found it on the planet's surface, intact and still functioning, despite what the dating analysis suggested, was thousands of rotations of abandonment. The Council's technicians had brought it aboard with extreme caution, following decontamination protocols designed for materials that might harbor unknown biological hazards. Veth stood in the observation gallery above the bay, watching through shielded glass as the medical team worked. The chamber was primitive by Sci-Fi standards, crude thermal regulation, basic life support, no neural interface for dream management. But it had preserved its occupant across a span of time that made the Sci-Fi's 11-generation voyage seem brief. Translation complete, the head linguist announced over the comm system. Species designation, human. Name, Kara. No other biographical data accessible. The medical team initiated the revival sequence. Veth watched temperature readings climb, watched fluid drain from the chamber, watched the first flutter of respiratory function on the biometric displays. The human emerged into consciousness with violence, thrashing against restraints that weren't there, gasping for air that filled her lungs too quickly, eyes wide with terror that no protocol could address. She was small by Sci-Fi standards, compact and dense with muscle, her skin flushed with blood flow that registered as thermal bloom on the sensors. She radiated heat, actual, measurable warmth. Veth felt something shift in his chest, some recognition that had no name in his language. The medical team sedated her. They moved her to a containment suite designed for biological study. They began the long process of teaching her their language, of understanding hers, of determining whether the impossible mathematics of her survival made any practical sense. Veth returned to his quarters. He did not sleep. He reviewed the biological data 17 times before his next duty cycle began. The human, Kara, could survive on the planet's surface. Her body was built for gravity, for unfiltered atmosphere, for thermal variance and liquid water and wind. She was the bridge between the Sci-Fi and continued existence. She was also, as far as anyone could determine, the last of her species. The Council established the protocols with characteristic efficiency. Kara would descend to the planet's surface. She would survey. She would identify resources, map terrain, assess locations for permanent structures that the Kethri could occupy while remaining in controlled environments. In exchange, she would receive medical care, technological support, company, purpose. The arrangement was logical, necessary, mutually beneficial. Veth was assigned as her liaison. His linguistic skills made him the obvious choice. His adherence to protocol made him reliable. The Council did not explain why they chose someone unmarked by personal attachments, someone whose efficiency ratings indicated comfort with solitary work. He did not question the assignment. The first meeting took place in a common area retrofitted with furniture scaled for her smaller frame. Kara sat with her back against the wall, her eyes tracking every movement in the room. She wore clothing the fabrication systems had produced based on her own descriptions, soft materials in earth tones, nothing like the efficient synthetic suits the Kethri used. "You're Veth," she said, in heavily accented but comprehensible Kethri. Her voice carried qualities the translation system struggled to render: texture, warmth, something that resonated in his chest. "Yes," he replied, maintaining the prescribed 2 meters of distance. "I will coordinate your surface missions and relay information to the Council." "Coordinate," she tested the word. "You mean watch while I do all the actual work? Your physiology permits surface access. Mine does not." "Right." She looked away, jaw tight. Lucky me. He should have responded with protocol, should have outlined the mission parameters and resource requirements. Instead, he noticed how her hands gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles pale against darker skin. How her breathing remained slightly elevated despite the sedatives still clearing from her system. "How long was I in that thing?" she asked quietly. "Dating analysis suggests between 4,000 and 6,000 rotations." "Rotations. Years. By your measurement." Her hands went still. She looked down at them as if seeing them for the first time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "Everyone's dead then. Everyone I knew." Veth had no protocol for this. No training in grief management or existential comfort. He stood in perfect stillness, watching her shoulders curve inward, watching her breathe through something he had no reference to comprehend. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words felt inadequate. She looked up at him then, truly looked, her dark eyes meeting his pale ones, and he felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical vulnerability. "At least I'm useful," she said finally. "At least there's that." The landing pod was not designed for comfort. Kara strapped into the pilot seat while Veth occupied the observer position, his long limbs folded into a space too small for Kethri proportions. Gravitational compensators hummed at maximum output, creating a localized field that would protect him from the crushing weight of planetary surface conditions. "Ready?" Kara's hands moved over the controls with confidence that surprised him. "Proceed when optimal." She initiated the descent sequence. The pod detached from the ship with a lurch that the compensators smoothed into gentle pressure. Through the viewport, the planet grew from abstraction to reality, cloud patterns resolving into weather systems, land masses showing detail, color shifting from orbital pale to surface vivid. Kara's breathing changed, quickened. Her pupils dilated. "You're experiencing anticipation," Veth observed. "I'm going outside," she said. "Actual outside? No suit, no barrier, just—" She trailed off, hands gripping the controls. "You wouldn't understand." "Explain." She glanced at him, something almost like amusement crossing her features. "Your people have lived in boxes for how long? 11 generations? You've never felt wind, you've never stood in rain, you've never—" She stopped herself. "It doesn't translate." The pod touched down in a clearing near fresh water, following coordinates Kara had selected from orbital scans. The gravitational compensators strained, keeping Veth's section of the pod at survivable pressure, while Kara's portion equalized with external conditions. She reached for the door release, then paused. "I could just leave," she said softly. "I could walk away and never come back." Veth felt something cold settle in his chest. "Yes, but you'd die." "Your whole species would die." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the door. The smell hit first, organic decay, growing things, moisture. The temperature differential registered on the pod's sensors as Kara stepped out onto soil. Veth watched through the viewport as she stood in direct sunlight, head tilted back, arms spread wide. She was crying. He had read about the human response to extreme emotion, the excess fluid, the facial contractions, the respiratory irregularity. But watching it happen, watching her shoulders shake with something between joy and grief, he felt his carefully maintained distance beginning to fracture. She walked to the water's edge, knelt, touched the surface with bare fingers, brought her wet hand to her face and breathed in the scent of it. "Veth," she said over the comm system. "Are you recording this?" "Yes." "Good." She turned to face the pod, her expression unreadable. "Tell your council I'll do the survey. I'll map everything they need, but I want something in return. The agreement provides for your medical care and—" "I don't want medical care." Her voice hardened. "I want you to come out here in person. I want someone to see this with me. Not through sensors. Actually here." "Impossible. The gravity would—" "Figure it out. You're brilliant at protocols and efficiency and survival, right? So survive this. Find a way to stand on actual ground, even for 5 minutes. Or I walk away, and you can watch your species suffocate through your precious sensors." She was not supposed to have leverage. The protocols had not accounted for her refusing cooperation. The protocols had not accounted for her being human. Veth spent the next rotation in the engineering section, reviewing schematics for enhanced environmental suits. The standard equipment would not suffice. Gravitational compensation required active systems that current power supplies could not sustain for more than minutes. But the Kithrai were experts in efficiency, in extracting maximum function from minimum resources. The head engineer, a female named Sith, examined his calculations with skeptical precision. "This would drain the suit's core in 8 minutes," she said, "and the exertion required to move under full gravity would accelerate your cardiovascular system beyond safe parameters." "I understand. You would have perhaps 5 minutes of functional time before system failure became dangerous." "Sufficient." Sith's pale eyes studied him. "The Council has not approved this deviation." "I am not requesting approval. I am requesting technical specifications." "Why?" The question was direct, almost aggressive. "She is useful. She is vulnerable. She has no alternative except cooperation. Why concede to her demands?" Veth looked down at his hands, long-fingered, marked with ritual scars, built for careful efficiency in controlled environments. He thought of Kara, standing in sunlight, crying from joy or grief, or some emotion he had no words to name. "Because she is correct," he said finally. "I should see it." Sith worked in silence for 3 rotations, building a suit that would probably fail and might cause permanent damage to whoever wore it. She did not report the project to the Council. When she handed Veth the finished equipment, she said only, "Be efficient with your time." Kara had been conducting the survey work as promised. Her reports came through with professional detail: water sources, mineral deposits, soil composition, weather patterns. But she also included observations the Council had not requested: the sound of wind through vegetation, the patterns of animal movement, the way light changed throughout the day cycle. Veth read every word. He found himself anticipating her transmissions, his work pace accelerating when her scheduled contact time approached. The Council noticed. They always noticed. "Your efficiency ratings have declined 2%, the Council liaison informed him during a routine review. "Is the assignment proving challenging?" "No." "Then explain the deviation." Veth met the liaison's gaze steadily. "I am adapting to working with a non-Kithrai. The learning curve is steeper than anticipated." It was truth. It was also evasion. The liaison accepted it because the protocols provided no framework for what was actually happening. Veth was becoming interested in someone else's internal experience. He was wondering what she felt, what she wanted, why she laughed sometimes over the comm system at things that made no rational sense. He was, though he had no concept to name it, developing emotional investment. The descent took everything the suit had. Veth felt the gravity like a physical assault, his bones aching, his muscles straining, his cardiovascular system hammering in protest. The suit's compensators screamed at maximum output. The heads-up display showed 5 minutes and 13 seconds of remaining power. Kara stood at the edge of her clearing, watching him stumble from the pod. He managed 3 steps before his knees buckled. She caught him, her small, dense frame supporting his weight with shocking ease, and he felt her warmth through 2 layers of protective material. "Easy," she murmured. "I've got you." His vision narrowed. His respiration sounded harsh inside the helmet. But he was standing on ground, actual planetary surface, with atmosphere moving around him and a star burning overhead without filtering. 4 minutes, Kara said, checking his suit readout. "We shouldn't waste it." She helped him to a flat stone near the water. The movement exhausted him. He sank down with controlled precision, refusing to show the full extent of his physical distress. "Here." She knelt in front of him, close enough that he could see the detail of her features. The darkness of her eyes, the variation in skin tone, the small imperfections that no Kethrai face displayed. "Give me your hand." "Protocol." "Fuck protocol." She reached for his gloved hand. "You came down here. You're dying down here, probably. At least let me show you why it matters." She placed his hand against the bark of the nearest tree. Even through the glove he felt the texture, rough, irregular, organic. "Trees," she said softly. "They pull water from the ground and air from their leaves. They're alive. Actually individually alive, not collective like your ship systems." She moved his hand to a patch of moss, to a smooth stone, to the surface of the water. "Everything here is separate," she continued. "Everything exists alone, but it all connects anyway. Roots and rain and decay and growth. It's chaos and it's beautiful, and it's nothing like your perfect efficiency, but it works, it survives." Veth watched her face as she spoke, saw how her expression shifted. Wonder, grief, loneliness, determination, all flowing through her features like water through her fingers. 2 minutes, his suit announced. Kara's jaw tightened. She looked at him, and something in her gaze made his breath catch. "Take off the helmet. That would be fatal, I know. But you have 2 minutes. What if you had 30 seconds without it? Actual contact with the world, would you die?" His medical training suggested no. The suit's air supply would sustain him through brief exposure. But the protocols were absolute. No breach of containment under any circumstances. Kara waited. She did not argue further. She simply looked at him with an expression that suggested she already knew his answer and was prepared to be disappointed by it. Veth reached for the helmet seal. "Wait." She moved closer, kneeling between his legs, her hands coming up to help with the release mechanism. "If you're going to break your rules, at least let me help." Her fingers found the seal points. He felt her breath against the helmet's surface. Then the mechanism released and the barrier between them vanished. The air hit him like a wave, thick, warm, full of scents he had no names for. His lungs expanded with it. His skin registered temperature variance. His eyes watered from unfiltered light. Kara's hand touched his face, her bare palm against his cheek, and he felt her warmth without any barrier. 60 seconds, the suit announced. He could not speak, could not process the sensory overload, could not name what he felt when her thumb traced the line of his jaw. When she leaned closer, and her breath warmed his skin. "I'm so alone here," she whispered. "And you're so alone up there. We're both just—" Her voice broke. "I don't want to be useful, I want to matter." His hand rose without conscious decision, his fingers threading through her hair, soft, textured, utterly unlike anything he had ever touched. She made a sound, something between surprise and relief, and pressed closer. 30 seconds. "Veth," she breathed against his skin. "Come back, please, even if it's only for minutes at a time, even if it kills you eventually. Come back." The suit's alarm screamed. Kara sealed the helmet with practiced efficiency, her movements gentle despite the urgency. Then she was helping him stand, supporting his weight, guiding him back to the pod. He collapsed into the observer seat. The compensators stabilized his gravitational load. His vision cleared slowly, his body screaming in protest at everything it had just endured. Through the viewport, he watched Kara stand in the clearing, one hand raised in farewell or acknowledgement or plea. He had 37 words in his vocabulary for efficiency. He had none for what he felt, watching her choose to stay on a planet that might kill her, rather than return to a ship where she would never be more than useful. The council called him to formal review 3 rotations later. Veth stood before them in the primary assembly chamber, his body still aching from the planetary descent, his mind fractured by sensory memories that would not fade. "You violated containment protocol," the council leader stated. "You exposed yourself to unfiltered planetary atmosphere. You made physical contact with the human without approved protective measures." "Yes." "Explain." Veth met their collective gaze. 5 members of the Council of Preservation, each scarred with the marks of ritual sacrifice, each representing thousands of lives dependent on careful adherence to survival protocols. "She requested my presence," he said. A refusal would have jeopardized her cooperation. Her cooperation is not optional. She has no alternative. She has solitude. She has the option to cease communication and live independently on the surface. We cannot compel her compliance. The council leader's expression did not change. "You believe she would choose death over usefulness. I believe she would choose existence over function." Silence filled the chamber. Veth felt his pulse in his throat, in his wrists, in the ritual scars across his shoulders. "Your efficiency ratings have declined," another council member said. "Your resource consumption has increased due to medical treatment for gravitational stress. Your work hours have shifted to accommodate non-essential communication with the human. Yes, you are becoming attached." It was not a question. It was an observation, stated with the clinical precision the Kethrai applied to all biological processes. "Yes," Veth said quietly. "Attachment is a luxury we abandoned 11 generations ago. Individual desire is subordinate to collective survival. You understand this?" "I understand." "Then explain why you persist in deviation." Veth thought of Kara's hand against his face, her breath warming his skin, her voice saying, "I don't want to be useful. I want to matter." "Because she is human," he said finally, "and we are asking her to save us while providing nothing she actually needs. We provide medical care, technological support. She needs connection. She needs to matter to someone beyond her functional utility. She needs—" He stopped himself, aware he was arguing from emotional logic the council would not accept. The council leader leaned forward slightly. "She needs what you are becoming unable to deny her." "Yes, this is acknowledged." The leader's tone carried no anger, no judgment, only the weight of inevitable mathematics. "You will continue as her liaison. You will maintain mission effectiveness. But understand, any choice to prioritize individual attachment over collective survival will be witnessed, recorded, and accepted as irrevocable separation from community benefit. You will not be punished. You will simply cease to matter to us." Veth felt the statement like physical impact. To cease to matter, to exist outside the collective, unmarked by protocol, uncounted in the calculations of survival. It was not death, it was erasure from meaning. "I understand," he said. He was dismissed. He returned to his quarters. He sat in measured silence, reviewing the choice the council had laid before him. Maintain his place in the collective or acknowledge that Kara had become more important than his entire species' continued existence. The mathematics were impossible. The answer felt inevitable anyway. The surface missions became routine. Kara would descend to continue the survey work. Veth would accompany her in the observer section of the pod, protected by gravitational compensation. They did not discuss his council review. They did not acknowledge the choice that hung between them, like the space between their hands that day in the clearing. But something had shifted. Kara began to build, not just shelters or resource caches, but a space. A small clearing near fresh water where she planted seeds from her hibernation pod's emergency stores. She arranged stones in patterns that seemed to calm her. She created a fire pit, using techniques she described as ancestral knowledge, though her ancestors had been dead for millennia. Veth watched through the pod's sensors. He logged her activities in his reports with clinical precision. He did not mention how she sat by her fire in the evenings and spoke aloud to the empty air, narrating her day as if someone listened, as if the act of being witnessed could make her less alone. He listened to every word. On the 4th mission, she planted a tree. "It won't mature in my lifetime," she said over the comm. "Maybe not even if I live to be 100, but it'll grow. It'll make oxygen and hold soil and provide shelter for smaller things. It'll matter beyond me." "Efficient long-term thinking," Veth observed. "No." She patted soil around the sapling's base. "Hopeful thinking. There's a difference. Explain. She looked up at the pod's sensor array, as if she could see him through the metal and distance. Efficiency is about survival. Hope is about living. You understand survival. I'm trying to remember how to live. His fingers moved across the data tablet automatically, logging her words in the mission record. But his mind stayed with the distinction she'd drawn: survival versus living, function versus existence. The Kethrai had optimized for survival. They had become extraordinarily efficient at not dying, but had they forgotten how to live? "Veth," Kara said quietly, "are you happy up there?" The question violated every communication protocol. Mission reports did not include queries about emotional states. Personal feelings were irrelevant to survey work. "Happiness is not a priority," he replied. "Survival requires—" "I know what it requires. I'm asking what you feel." He looked down at his hands, long-fingered, marked with scars that proved his commitment to collective benefit. Hands that had never touched growing things or felt rain or threaded through someone's hair with desperate tenderness. "I do not know," he said finally. "The concept is imprecise." "Yeah," she returned to her planting. "It is." The suit failures began during the 6th descent. Veth's enhanced environmental equipment had been designed for brief exposure, not repeated stress. The gravitational compensators were degrading faster than engineering could repair them. Sith informed him of the technical realities with characteristic bluntness. 3 more descents, perhaps 4, then the suit will fail catastrophically. Understood. You could cease surface contact. Observe remotely. That would reduce mission effectiveness. That would preserve your life. Veth did not respond. Sith's pale eyes studied him with uncomfortable precision. "She matters to you," the engineer said. "More than protocols, more than survival mathematics." "Yes." "Inefficient." "Yes." Sith turned back to her work. "I will optimize the remaining operational time. But Veth, when the suit fails, it will fail completely. You will have perhaps 30 seconds to return to pressurized environment before permanent damage occurs." Acknowledged. The 7th descent lasted 12 minutes. Veth spent half that time simply standing in Kara's clearing, his body screaming in protest, his mind cataloguing every detail. The smell of her fire, the sound of wind through leaves, the warmth of her proximity when she stood close enough to touch. She did not ask him to remove the helmet again. She seemed to understand that the request would force a choice neither of them was ready to name. Instead, she walked him through her growing garden, identifying each plant, describing what it would become, explaining its place in the ecosystem she was slowly cultivating. "This is mint," she said, crushing a leaf and holding it near his helmet so he could smell it through the air filters. "For tea, for medicine, for remembering that not everything has to be efficient. Some things exist just to make life more bearable. Recreational resource consumption," he observed. "Joy," she corrected. "It's called joy." When the suit's alarms began screaming, she helped him back to the pod with gentle hands and careful support. At the hatch, she paused. "How many more?" she asked quietly. "Times I can descend. Until you can't anymore." He looked at her through the helmet's face shield, her dark eyes, her expression showing something between resignation and grief. "2," he said. "Perhaps 3." She nodded slowly. Then she did something unexpected. She pressed her hand flat against the helmet's surface, directly over where his face was, as if she could touch him through the barrier. "Make them count," she whispered. The 8th descent lasted 6 minutes before the suit's primary compensator failed. Veth felt his bones compress, felt his cardiovascular system strain beyond safe parameters, felt the weight of an entire world trying to crush him into the soil. Kara dragged him back to the pod with strength he hadn't known she possessed. She sealed him into the pressurized section and initiated emergency ascent while he struggled to remain conscious. When he woke, he was in the ship's medical bay. Sith stood over him, her expression carefully neutral. "Compression fractures in 3 ribs," she reported. "Cardiovascular strain approaching critical thresholds. Neural stress from sustained gravitational overload. You are extremely fortunate to be alive." "The suit destroyed. I cannot build another. The resources do not exist, and the Council would not approve the allocation even if they did." Veth closed his eyes. He had known this moment would come. had known from the first descent that he was counting down to an ending, but knowing and experiencing proved to be entirely different states. "Kara," he said quietly, "has been notified. She is—" Sith paused, seeming to search for the correct protocol. Distressed. They let him rest for 2 rotation cycles, then they cleared him for light duty, with strict prohibitions against any activity that might stress his damaged cardiovascular system. He returned to the observation deck, to the data tablet, to the mission reports that now came through without his presence on the surface. Kara's transmissions grew shorter, less detailed. She continued the survey work with mechanical efficiency, but the observations about joy and hope and living disappeared from her reports. On the 5th day after his injury, she broke protocol entirely. "I can't do this anymore," she said over an open comm channel. "I can't just function for you. I can't be useful and isolated and empty. I thought I could, but I can't. Kara, you almost died coming down here. You risked everything just to stand in the same space as me for a few minutes. And now you can't ever come back, and I'm supposed to just keep surveying and mapping and building your survival for you while I die inside from loneliness." Her voice broke. Through the sensor feeds, he watched her sitting by her fire, her shoulders curved inward, her hands clenched into fists. "Please," he said, and the word felt like breaking every protocol he'd ever learned. "Please continue. We need— I know what you need. What about what I need? What about—" She stopped herself. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "What about us?" The word hung in the air between them, us, implying connection. Implying that somewhere in the space between survival and living, between function and existence, they had become something together. "I am prohibited from descending," Veth said carefully. "But you could—" "Ascend?" She laughed, hollow and bitter. "Come up there and live in your perfect efficient boxes while you all slowly suffocate. Watch you from a distance, always separated by protocols and species differences, and the fundamental fact that I'll never be Kethri? Yes." The word fell like a stone, an admission, an offering. Kara looked up at the sensor array, her face tracked by tears that left trails through the dirt on her cheeks. "You'd want that?" she asked, "even though it would be inefficient? Even though the Council would see it as attachment?" "I already see it as attachment," Veth said quietly. "The Council has already witnessed my choice. I ceased to matter to them the moment I descended to stand beside you. Veth, come up here," he said. "Come exist in my spaces. Let me witness your life. Let me matter to you, the way you matter to me." She was silent for a long moment. Then she stood, wiped her face with her sleeve, and looked directly at the sensor. "I'll need a day to prepare," she said. "To say goodbye to what I've built here." Acknowledged. The comm channel closed. Veth sat in the observation deck, looking down at the planet that had almost killed him, at the clearing where Kara had planted hope in soil and shown him the difference between surviving and living. He had made his choice. The mathematics were impossible. The answer felt like the only truth he'd ever known. Kara arrived at the ship with soil under her fingernails and seeds in her pockets. She carried a small bag containing items she described as non-essential but meaningful. Smooth stones from her clearing, dried mint leaves, a piece of wood worn smooth by her hands during long evenings alone. The Council did not approve her presence. They did not forbid it. They simply noted that she was a biological asset, choosing to occupy ship resources, and that her liaison had accepted responsibility for her resource consumption and integration needs. Veth met her at the docking bay. She stood in the airlock, looking small and strange against the metal and efficiency of Kethri engineering. When the pressure equalized and the inner door opened, she stepped through and looked at him with an expression he could not fully pass. "It's cold up here," she said quietly. "Temperature is maintained at optimal levels for—" "I know. I don't mean the thermometer. I mean—" She gestured vaguely at the stark corridors, the precise lighting, the complete absence of anything that wasn't functional. "It's cold." He showed her to the quarters he had prepared, his own, because the Council had made clear that her resource allocation would come from his portion. She examined the space with visible dismay. Sleep platform, sanitation unit, storage compartments, nothing else. "You live like this," she said. Not a question. "Yes. Where do you keep things that make you happy?" "Happiness is not a priority, I know." She set her bag down carefully. Can I change that? The quarters are assigned to you now. Configure them as you wish. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, she unpacked her stones and arranged them on the storage shelf. She hung her dried mint from the ventilation grate. She placed the worn piece of wood beside the sleep platform. There, she said softly. Now someone lives here. The adaptation was not smooth. Kara struggled with the recycled air, the constant temperature, the absence of natural light cycles. She struggled more with the Kethri themselves, their careful distance, their efficiency, their complete lack of casual physical contact. Veth watched her move through common spaces where people stood prescribed distances apart, spoke only when necessary, touched nothing without purpose. He saw how she tried to respect the protocols, how she failed, how she apologized for failures the Kethri found incomprehensible. "Why do you say sorry when you stand too close?" Sith asked her one day in the engineering section. "Because I'm invading your space," Kara replied. "You are occupying physical proximity. There is no invasion, but it makes people uncomfortable. Discomfort is irrelevant to function." Kara looked at Veth, her expression showing something close to despair. "How do you live like this?" He had no answer. He had never questioned it before. The conflicts began small. Kara hummed while working, a habit she described as unconscious. The sound disrupted concentration in shared spaces. She touched surfaces unnecessarily, running her fingers along walls, picking up tools to examine them, adjusting items that were already optimally positioned. The other Kethri reported these deviations, not as complaints, simply as observations of inefficient behavior. The council suggested she might be more comfortable in isolated quarters. "Isolated," Kara repeated, when Veth relayed the suggestion. "Like I wasn't isolated enough on the planet. Now I'm supposed to be isolated on the ship too. It would reduce friction." "I don't want to reduce friction." Her voice rose sharp with frustration. "I want to exist somewhere. I want to matter to someone. I want—" She stopped herself, breathing hard. "What do you want?" Veth asked quietly. She looked at him and he saw the truth in her eyes before she spoke it. "You," she said. "I want you. Not as a liaison. Not as a protocol-following observer. You. The person who broke every rule to stand in my garden. The person who almost died just to touch my hand. That's who I want." The admission hung between them like the space between their palms that first day, charged, impossible, alive with tension that had nothing to do with atmospheric pressure. "The council—" "I don't care about the council. Do you care? Actually care? Not just follow along because it's protocol?" Veth thought of his efficiency ratings declining, of his ritual scars marking sacrifices for collective benefit, of 32 rotations of disciplined adherence to survival mathematics. Then he thought of Kara's warmth against his skin, of her voice saying, "I don't want to be useful, I want to matter," of the way she looked at him like he was more than the sum of his functions. "Yes," he said, "I care." She moved closer. The prescribed 2 meters became 1, became less. "Then show me," she whispered. "Show me you're not just efficient. Show me you're alive." His hand rose to her face, fingers tracing the line of her jaw, the way he had in those 30 seconds without his helmet. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing, her breath warming his palm. "Kara, I know this is breaking every rule. I know the council will witness and record and separate you from collective benefit. But Veth, I've been alone for thousands of years. I've survived, but I haven't lived. Please, live with me." He pulled her closer, felt her warmth through the synthetic fabric of his uniform, felt her heart beating against his chest, impossibly fast, impossibly alive. "Yes," he said against her hair. "Yes." The council called them both to formal review the next rotation. They stood together in the assembly chamber, maintaining prescribed distance by Kethri standards, but close enough that Veth could feel Kara's presence like heat. "So you have formed an attachment," the council leader stated. "This is witnessed." "Yes," Veth replied. "The human has ceased survey work. The mission objectives are incomplete." "I can complete them," Kara said, "but not alone, not anymore. Solitude does not prevent function. Solitude prevents living." Her voice was steady, clear. "I can give you all the data you need. I can help you build survival structures on the surface. I can be useful. But I won't do it at the cost of existence, not again. You have no alternative, another council member observed. You cannot survive alone on the surface indefinitely. No, but I survived alone for thousands of years. I can do it again if I have to. The question is whether you can survive without me. The mathematics was simple, brutal, honest. The council leader turned to Veth. You have chosen individual attachment over collective survival. This is irrevocable. I understand. You will cease to receive resource allocation from collective stores. You will be permitted to remain aboard, but outside social benefit calculations. You will exist, but not matter to Kethrai continuation. Acknowledged. And yet, the leader continued, the human's cooperation is necessary. Her unique physiology provides the only bridge to surface resources. The question becomes, can we provide what she requires while maintaining our protocols? Silence filled the chamber. Veth felt Kera's hand brush against his. Barely contact, just proximity, just presence. What do you require? The council leader asked Kera directly. I require connection, she said simply. I require mattering to someone. I require existence, not just survival. And I require that Veth receives the same. Inefficient. Yes. But alive. The council conferred in silence, their expressions showing nothing. Finally, the leader spoke. We propose an alternative protocol. You will continue surface survey work. Veth will accompany you via remote observation as his physiology prevents descent. In exchange, you will both receive resource allocation sufficient for 2 individuals, and you will be exempt from standard efficiency requirements in your shared quarters. Why? Kera asked. Why accommodate us? Because, the leader said carefully, you have demonstrated that survival mathematics must account for variables we had eliminated from our calculations: purpose, connection, the distinction between living and merely continuing to exist. A pause. Our protocols were designed for survival, but perhaps survival alone is insufficient. They returned to the surface together. Kera in person, Veth through sensors and communication arrays. She showed him everything she had built, narrating each detail as if he stood beside her instead of orbiting above. This is where I was going to plant a second tree, she said, standing in her clearing. Before I thought I'd never come back. Plant it now, Veth suggested. Why? I won't be here to see it grow. No, but it will grow anyway. It will matter beyond your presence. She was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. Genuine, warm, alive. You're learning. You're teaching. She planted the tree while he watched. She arranged stones in new patterns. She gathered seeds and soil samples and data for the Kethrai's survival structures. But she also sat by her fire and spoke to him about nothing important. About the taste of mint tea, about the sound of rain, about what it meant to matter to someone. On the ship, Veth transformed their shared quarters. He asked Kera what made a space feel like living instead of just existing. She brought plants that survived in artificial light. She hung fabric in colors that had no function. She created what she called intentional inefficiency, objects and arrangements that existed solely to make the space feel less cold. The other Kethrai noticed. Some maintained strict protocol, treating Veth and Kera as biological anomalies to be observed but not engaged. Others began asking questions. About joy, about purpose, about the difference between survival and living. Sith appeared in their quarters one evening, standing at the prescribed distance, but looking uncomfortable with it. I have been thinking, the engineer said carefully, about your tree. Yes? Kera prompted. It serves no immediate function. It provides no essential resources, yet you plant it anyway, knowing you may never witness its maturity. That's right. Why? Kera looked at Veth, then back at Sith. Because something should outlive us. Because beauty matters. Because hope is efficient in ways your protocols don't measure. Sith nodded slowly. I would like to learn this calculation. It was not revolution. The Council did not abandon their protocols. The Kethrai did not transform overnight into beings who prioritized joy over survival. But small changes began. Crew members started keeping personal items. Someone planted seeds in the hydroponics bay that served no nutritional purpose. In the common areas, the prescribed distances shrank by increments so small They might have been accidental. Except the Kethri did nothing accidentally. Veth watched his people begin to remember how to live, and he felt something he had no protocols to name, something that felt like warmth, even in the ship's controlled temperature, like growth, even in the void of space. Kara would descend to the surface. He would watch from above. She would build and plant and survey, and he would witness every moment. Then she would return to their quarters that smelled of mint and contained stones arranged for beauty instead of function. And in the evenings they would sit close enough to touch, her warmth radiating through the space between them. His careful distance finally abandoned, both of them existing in the impossible mathematics of choosing each other over survival. The planet turned below. The ship maintained its orbit. The fusion cores continued their slow degradation, but in the spaces between protocol and efficiency, between survival and living, something new was growing. Not a solution, not a guarantee of survival, just two beings who had chosen existence over function, connection over isolation, each other over everything else. And for the first time in 11 generations, the Kethri understood that sometimes the most efficient path forward required learning how to be inefficient, how to plant trees they'd never see mature, how to love someone the protocols never accounted for, how to live